There is a form of slavery that does not look like slavery. No chains, no guards, no violence, only comfort. And that is precisely why almost no one resists it. Right now, somewhere in your day, you probably felt it. A small urge. You reached for your phone, a quick scroll, a short video, a notification, a hit of stimulation. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. Just a small dose of pleasure. But what if those moments are not as harmless as they appear? What if the constant search for pleasure is quietly reshaping your mind, training you to accept a life that slowly becomes smaller, weaker, and more controlled? Most men never ask that question. Because pleasure feels like freedom. You can watch what you want, consume what you want, escape whenever reality becomes uncomfortable. But history contains a dangerous warning, one that almost nobody pays attention to anymore. Nearly a century ago, Aldous Huxley described a future where people would not be oppressed through fear. They would be pacified through pleasure. In his vision, society would not need brutal dictators or violent repression. Instead, people would be surrounded by endless entertainment, chemical happiness, sexual gratification, and constant distraction. A population drowning in stimulation, a population too entertained to resist, too comfortable to question anything, too distracted to notice their own chains. At the time, many readers believed it was just science fiction. But decades later, Huxley himself admitted something unsettling. He believed the world was moving much closer to his prediction than anyone wanted to admit. Because controlling people through fear creates resistance, but controlling people through pleasure creates obedience. Think carefully about the world around you: endless content, infinite entertainment, pornography available in seconds, algorithms designed to keep your attention locked for hours, a constant stream of stimulation engineered to feel irresistible, and slowly something begins to happen. Attention weakens, discipline erodes, purpose fades. Not because people are forced into submission, but because they are gently trained to prefer comfort over control. This is the hidden danger of pleasure. It doesn't destroy you violently. It dissolves you slowly. And the worst part is this: the more pleasure a system gives you, the less likely you are to question it. If this way of thinking feels rare where you are, subscribe now. To understand how pleasure can quietly turn into control, you need to understand something about the human brain. Your mind is not designed for infinite stimulation. It is designed for survival. For most of human history, pleasure was rare. Food required effort, comfort required work, social status required competence. Even entertainment demanded patience. Pleasure had to be earned. Because of that, the brain evolved a simple system to guide behavior. Reward what helps survival, repeat what produces reward. This system runs on dopamine, but dopamine is widely misunderstood. It is not the chemical of happiness. It is the chemical of pursuit. It pushes you toward things that promise pleasure, and when the reward arrives, your brain learns something important. Do this again. This mechanism is powerful enough to shape habits, identities, even entire societies. In the 20th century, psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated how easily behavior could be shaped using rewards. In his experiments, animals placed in controlled environments quickly learned new behaviors when small rewards were introduced. Press a lever, receive food, repeat the action, receive another reward. Eventually, the behavior became automatic. The animal didn't need to be forced. It trained itself. What Skinner discovered was simple, but deeply unsettling. Punishment creates resistance. Reward creates compliance. And when rewards are delivered frequently enough, behavior becomes predictable. Now imagine applying this principle not to animals in a laboratory, but to millions of people in a modern society. This is where the warning from Aldous Huxley becomes uncomfortable. Because in Brave New World, control did not come through violence. It came through conditioning. Citizens were surrounded by pleasure, a drug that removed anxiety, endless entertainment, sex without responsibility, constant stimulation. The system did not force obedience. It made obedience enjoyable, and that changes everything. Because when pleasure becomes the dominant force in a culture, people slowly lose something essential: their tolerance for discomfort. And without the ability to tolerate discomfort, discipline begins to collapse. Attention weakens. Long-term goals start to feel exhausting. Meaningful work becomes harder to sustain. The mind begins to prefer immediate reward over long-term freedom. You can see the pattern everywhere today. Endless scrolling, pornography addiction, streaming platforms that consume entire evenings, apps engineered to trigger dopamine spikes every few seconds. None of this looks like oppression. But the psychological effect is real. A distracted population does not resist anything, not because it is forced to obey, but because it is too stimulated to think clearly. And this creates a deeper danger, because when a man loses control of his attention, he slowly loses control of his life. But something even more interesting happens next. At a certain point, some people begin to feel a strange kind of discomfort, a quiet sense that something about this system is wrong. They start withdrawing, spending more time alone, questioning the habits everyone else accepts, and at first, they think something is wrong with them. We need to examine a possibility most people never consider. What if that discomfort is not a problem? What if it is the beginning of waking up? At some point, a strange shift begins to happen inside a man. Nothing dramatic on the outside, life still looks normal, work continues, conversations happen, days pass. But internally, something starts to fracture. The things that once felt satisfying begin to feel empty. The endless stream of entertainment no longer relaxes him the same way. The quick pleasures that once felt harmless begin to leave a subtle aftertaste of fatigue. Even social environments start to feel strangely artificial, as if everyone is participating in a script that nobody consciously agreed to. At first, he assumes the problem is personal. Maybe he's burned out. Maybe he's becoming antisocial. Maybe he just needs a vacation, a new hobby, a different routine, so he tries to fix it the same way everyone else does. More stimulation, more content, more distraction, more small escapes from reality. But something unusual happens. The more he feeds the system, the more dissatisfied he becomes. And that is the moment most people misinterpret. Because what feels like collapse is often the beginning of separation. The old structure of identity no longer fits. For years, the environment quietly shaped his habits. It rewarded speed, comfort, and constant stimulation. It trained his mind to seek pleasure before meaning, convenience before effort, distraction before reflection. And without realizing it, he built an identity around that environment. But when the mind begins to notice the pattern, the old identity starts to lose its authority. The habits remain, the impulses remain, but the belief behind them begins to weaken. This creates an uncomfortable phase. Externally, the world continues exactly as before. The same entertainment, the same social expectations, the same endless invitation to escape into pleasure, but internally, something refuses to fully participate anymore. This is where many men become confused, because the distance they begin to feel from the surrounding culture can look like isolation. Friends may not understand the shift, conversations feel repetitive, social spaces that once felt normal now feel strangely shallow. It can create the impression that something has gone wrong. But often, what is actually happening is psychological restructuring. The mind is trying to detach from a system that previously shaped it without resistance, and during that process, there is always a dangerous temptation to rebuild too quickly. When an old identity collapses, the mind searches for a replacement. It wants certainty. It wants structure again. That urgency can push a man toward new ideologies, extreme beliefs, or rigid identities that promise clarity, but simply replace one form of conditioning with another. The environment that trained the old version of him has not disappeared. The same forces still exist. The same pleasures are still available. The same distractions still compete for attention every second. The real question is no longer whether the system exists. The real question is whether he rebuilds himself consciously or quietly falls back into the same structure that shaped him the first time. Because once a man begins to see the mechanism behind pleasure-driven control, returning to unconscious participation becomes much harder. And yet most people eventually do exactly that. At this stage, a dangerous story begins to form in the mind. It sounds reasonable at first. The system is the problem, technology is the problem, the culture is the problem, and there is truth in that observation. Modern environments are engineered for stimulation. Platforms compete for attention. Entire industries profit from keeping people entertained, distracted, and emotionally reactive. But there is a line most people quietly cross without realizing it. The moment awareness turns into blame. Because once a man begins to believe that external forces are the primary reason for his condition, something subtle happens. Our responsibility starts to dissolve. The mind moves into a passive posture. He begins observing the system instead of confronting himself inside it. But the uncomfortable reality is this: the environment may influence behavior. It does not eliminate choice. Millions of people are exposed to the same technologies, the same entertainment, the same endless stream of dopamine triggers. Yet only some people completely lose control of their attention. Only some people drift into years of passive consumption. Only some people allow pleasure to replace discipline entirely, which means the real battle is not happening in the culture. It is happening in the nervous system of the individual. Because pleasure does not enslave a man by force. It enslaves him through repetition. Every time he chooses the easy stimulus over the difficult task, the brain reinforces a pattern. Comfort instead of effort. Escape instead of responsibility. Immediate reward instead of long-term direction. At first, these decisions seem insignificant. 5 minutes of distraction, another short video, another delay before starting something that requires effort. But the brain is always learning, always adapting. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition, and slowly, almost invisibly, a psychological shift begins. Discipline starts to feel heavier, focus becomes harder to sustain. The mind grows impatient with anything that does not provide immediate stimulation. What once required effort now feels almost impossible to maintain. This is how pleasure quietly weakens autonomy, not through dramatic collapse, but through gradual conditioning. And this is where many men face the most uncomfortable realization of the entire process. The system may offer the stimulus, but the habit was built through thousands of personal decisions. That realization can trigger frustration, even anger, but it also reveals something powerful. Because if behavior was built through repetition, it can also be rebuilt through repetition. Not through motivation, not through temporary bursts of discipline, but through structure. Deliberate control of attention. Deliberate control of behavior. Deliberate tolerance for discomfort. This is the point where excuses lose their usefulness. Because without structure, awareness alone changes nothing. A man can understand the entire psychological mechanism behind pleasure-driven control and still remain trapped inside it. Knowledge does not create freedom. Only disciplined behavior does, and that is where reconstruction begins. The most dangerous lie about modern pleasure is not that it exists. Pleasure has always existed. Food tastes good, rest feels good, entertainment can be healthy in small doses. None of that is the real threat. The danger appears when pleasure stops being a reward and becomes a lifestyle. Because the human mind was never designed to live in permanent stimulation, when reward becomes constant, something inside the system begins to malfunction. Motivation weakens, attention fragments, long-term thinking fades, and slowly, without noticing, a man starts drifting. Not collapsing dramatically, just drifting. Years pass, energy declines, focus becomes rare. The sense of direction that once existed begins to disappear under layers of distraction and easy comfort. That is the quiet outcome Aldous Huxley warned about. A society that doesn't need chains, a population that willingly trades its autonomy for convenience, stimulation, and endless small pleasures. But there is an important detail most people miss. The system works on the majority, not on everyone. Throughout history, there have always been individuals who recognized the pattern early enough to step outside it. Not because they were smarter, not because they were stronger, but because they made a simple decision that most people avoid. They stopped negotiating with their impulses. They rebuilt structure. They protected their attention the same way others protect money or status. They removed the habits that constantly weakened their focus. They reduced the noise that flooded their mind every day. And slowly, something started returning. Clarity, energy, direction. When attention becomes stable again, something powerful happens. A man begins to experience reality differently. Work becomes more meaningful. Goals become clearer. Discipline no longer feels like punishment, but like control. And control is the one thing a pleasure-driven culture quietly erodes. Because a man who controls his attention is difficult to manipulate. He is difficult to distract, difficult to condition. That is the real form of freedom most people never develop. Not political freedom. Psychological freedom. The ability to choose effort when comfort is available. To choose growth when distraction is easier. To choose long-term meaning over short-term pleasure. And once that internal structure begins to rebuild, something interesting happens. The same world that once felt overwhelming becomes manageable again. The same distractions lose much of their power. The same system that quietly shaped millions of people suddenly has far less influence over the individual who understands it. This is where the quiet separation begins. Not loud, not dramatic, just a different level of awareness, and a different level of discipline. If this way of thinking resonates with you, there is another step worth exploring. On your screen right now, there is a video that goes deeper into how modern systems compete for your attention and shape human behavior in ways most people never notice. Watch that next, because once you start seeing these mechanisms clearly, the way you understand your own life begins to change.